My name is Johanna Hall, and I was born October the 28th, 1952. I came to live with my grandparents in 1953 when I was 6 months old. My grandparents were J. Leslie and Marie Roundtree Miller, and my grandfather was working for Lerman Brothers in 1935, and he came here as a manager with Lerman Brothers to close the store in Taylorsville. The store at that time was located on the southwest corner of Washington and Main Street, and he was to be here 3 months. He was coming from Campbellsville, and he was dating Marie Roundtree that was working in the store there in Campbellsville. And she stayed in Campbellsville, and he came here for being here only 3 months to close the store. And as it happened, as he worked with the store, he turned the store around and began to make a profit. And Lerman Brothers decided that they would keep the store open if he would stay and manage it. And so he said that he would, and he went back to Campbellsville and proposed to my grandmother. And they were married in August of 1935, and she moved to Taylorsville, and they managed the Lerman store at that time. And so they had a good business there, and they did a lot of growth in the store. But flooding was a big problem in Taylorsville at that time. In 1935, there was no flood wall yet, and so there was a lot of frequent flooding that flooded a lot of the businesses. And I remember my grandfather, J. Leslie Miller, talking about how that he moved the store upstairs many times because of the flood. And so in the late 30s, Lerman's decided that they would move the store down to what is now 32 East Main Street, where the red scooter is in that building at this time. And so they moved down there, and they found that that was a good location. It was a bigger store. It had more room, and so they did much growth there as well. And Taylorsville was a really thriving community at the time. They moved to the Lerman store that's now 32 East Main Street, and the red scooter is currently in that location. And so they, at that point, the store, here's an ad from the Spencer Magnet that shows that they had a thriving business at this point, and I don't know exactly the date of this ad, but it says 7 from 100 leaves 93, simple subtraction, but it brings home to us that our store is a long road to travel in order to boast of 100-year record. 7 years ago, Lerman Brothers came to Taylorsville with a modest store, and today ours is the most modern and largest retail establishment in town. Not bad, for which we say thank you, and we hope to continue serving you. So at this point, they had been in town for 7 years. Now, Taylorsville at that time looked kind of like this, with mud streets. A lot of traffic, though, and as you see, a lot of cars, and they're all parked in the street there. The businesses did a lot of things to try to to bring people to town and to keep their business going. And one of the things that they did was that they had Christmas celebration. They had a big Christmas parade, and they brought people to town so that they would be there for the parade and to shop. And they also would have drawings. And what they did with the drawing was that when you went to a participating business and you bought $1 or 50 cents worth, the interval changed over time. It's inflation, I guess. And so when you bought that amount, you got a ticket, and you took your ticket, you put your name on it. It was 2 parts, and you put your name on it and put your name in the barrel. And they would have drawings at times during Saturdays, like 10 or 2 or something, and usually had some late in the afternoon. And you had to be present to win, and so they would draw out your name, and you would win a cash prize. the businesses all contributed and put that money in for the business, for the drawings. So they would find that they found this was a big draw, and as you can see here, this is a picture in the 1940s, and this is a picture of the parade. And if you can, I don't know that you can see very well, but there's Santa Claus on the second car in the parade there. And then this is a picture looking down the other way, down the street the other way, and you can see down that end of the town and how many people were in town for the parade. And then here we have a picture of the drawings. And here again is Santa Claus. And this is J. Leslie Miller III. This is my father. And they were having a drawing here. And it's in the town square. This was the town. They put up a Christmas tree every year in the town square. And so that was their drawing crowd. And you see how many people were around in that time. My grandparents had been living in the various rental apartments and houses around the city, and they decided they would like to have a more permanent place to live. And they were at the Lermans on Main Street, and they discussed that with the owners of the building, and they decided they would take part of the upstairs and build an apartment where they could live. So they built a 3-bedroom apartment up there and lived up there for the remainder of the time that they were working for Lermans. And that apartment was used by other managers later in time, and it also is still used by the Red Scooter. They have displays in the upstairs apartment. A large portion of the county, of course, at that time was rural, and they had some farming. It was a big farming community, and most of the farms grew tobacco as their biggest cash crop, and they had raised corn or hay, and so they sold some of it, and of course, but they saved some of it as well for their cattle. And most of the cows that they had were dairy cattle, not beef cattle, and they had large dairies. And a lot of times they milked the cows by hand, and so it was a lot of work, and it had to be done twice a day. It was very confining for the people, and their income was large at the end of the year when they sold their tobacco, but through the rest of the time they had a milk check that came in every few weeks, and other than that they may not have any other income unless they worked outside off the farm. So it was very critical for a lot of the businesses to have credit, and so it was, I remember, very common for my grandparents to have a credit for many of the farmers, and they would pay along on their bill throughout the year, but then at the end of the year when they'd sell their tobacco, they would pay it off. And that was very unique in a farming community, I think, but also it was critical for them, and that was one of the reasons also that they probably shopped more locally. Another reason was the distances and the time of the travel to another place. Getting into Louisville, the bigger city, was a very curvy, hilly, narrow road, number one, and number two, you had to travel far down into Jefferson County to get to where the development was. There wasn't anything out in the outskirts of Jefferson County at the time. I've been told that there was a Kroger store in the county, in Taylorsville at one time, and that it didn't succeed because they didn't take credit, because people could not survive without some help. They couldn't make it through that long periods of time without major income. So in the late 1940s, J. Leslie and Marie decided to go into business for themselves, and so they bought the closed Presbyterian church that was on the northeast corner of Main and Jefferson, and they remodeled the building, and they took off about 50 feet off the steeple, and they extended the balcony out to make a whole second floor in the building, and they also added one-story front to it that gave it windows for display and also a better entrance into the building. A couple of years later, they added an apartment to the side, 2-bedroom apartment is for them to live in, and that's where I grew up. The after they remodeled the building, they decided that they would call it Miller's Merchandise Mart. And on the first floor, they would have a grocery. And on the second, they would have a dry goods store or department store. And they had a motto of "We feed and clothe the family." And here's a picture of in the grocery on the first floor. And this was made in 1953. This is just showing all of the advertisements and things that they had available. And it's those steps, as you can see right here in the front, they go up to the department store. And they had trucks that they went to Louisville to get supplies for the grocery stores. My grandfather's standing in front of one of the big trucks, and here he is one of the trucks over here, and also behind it is the delivery truck, and they delivered in town groceries for people. He would make many trips to Louisville during the week for groceries, for produce, for meat. I remember I loved to go with him, but he always leave early in the morning, particularly if there was something on sale that he had to go get fresh meat. If there would be chickens on sale for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, that was when the ad would run. And he would go on Thursday morning, like at 4 in the morning, to bring home fresh chickens so that they would be there for the grocery when it opened. Well, at my age, at the point, I wasn't driving, but but I would assume it was narrow, that's for sure, and it was curvy and dark. There wasn't any, lights on the roads, and it was all out in rural areas. So, it did have some danger to it, and it was a long trip. That was the biggest point, I think, at that point in time in the morning. I would think it was a long trip, but I'm also sure there was many people that made that trip driving to Louisville to work as well. And they decided also on the second floor, as we said, they were going to have a department store. And in the department store, they were going to have all kinds of clothing, and they had toys and shoes and sewing material and thread and rickrack and all those kinds of things. And this was a postcard that they sent out to the community to tell everybody that they were going to open the dry goods store. It says, "Dear friends, having resigned from Lerman Brothers Department Store, which we have been operating as managers for the past 16 years, we are now opening up our new department in connection with our UBC supermarket. We will have a complete line of ladies, children's, and infants' dresses, lingerie, hose, Star brand shoes for men, women, and children, men's and boys' work clothing, and sportswear. We will do our best to serve you in the future as we have in the past. We will be looking for you Saturday, March the 17th. Leslie and Marie Miller." And so this is a picture of them in the upstairs area, and you can see they had bicycles and wagons, and as well as clothing below. And I also have a picture of in the grocery. This is my grandfather standing in front of a display, and the display is for 500 pick-up pantry supplies from one simple recipe, ready in 15 minutes. So it sounds like really fast food if it doesn't. The outside of the store didn't change a whole lot. This is a picture of it in the outside in the early 50s. You can see we have a red delivery truck here. The streets are still more of a gravelly look, and I can remember lots of delivery from the Coke store, Coke delivery, the bread delivery, the milk delivery. There was always somebody coming and going, and I thought I was the big friends with all the delivery people. In 1953, in the upstairs ceiling fell, and this is the article out of the Courier Journal that shows the ceiling falling. And my grandmother talked about it being a really loud noise and cracking, and they realized something was happening. And she and the customers and a salesman, a traveling salesman, and the people that were there all got over in a corner and underneath the tables. Most of the articles were displayed on a table, and so they got under and around those tables, and the big beams fell down on the tables, so it kind of protected them. And then when it was all over, they crawled out and down the steps. No one was hurt. My grandmother talked about it being a very beautiful day. Said there wasn't a cloud in the sky, there wasn't wind blowing, there wasn't anything that would look like a storm. It just simply fell. But there was no one hurt, and so once they got it all cleaned up and found what was salvageable, they had a big sale. And this is dated, this is the ad from the Spencer Magnet, and it is dated June the 5th, 1953, and this is the ad that they were selling. This is all the salvageable items. After the ceiling fell and they got that all cleaned up and all fixed, they had still had a lot of growing to do and a lot of business happening around town. There's a lot of growth still in Taylorsville going on. And in the late 50s, my grandparents opened a small store down town. It was down between what was the old People's Bank building, which was at that time the United States Post Office, and the Valley Theater. And that building has since been torn down. But they opened a women's dress shop, and it was called the Cinderella Shop. And all they sold were women's dresses, and that was there for a few years. And then they closed that, and they opened a variety store in the same location, and it was kind of like a five and dime store. They just had a variety of different things, and they sold that in a few years as well. When I was little, I had run of the store for the most part, and all through my adulthood, I've had people stop me and say, "Oh, I remember you when you were little, running around the store." So they were I was very visible, and I'm sure aggravating just to many people. But anytime that anybody came and brought their children, that was a big deal, because I could take out the kids and I would go play. Anytime they came into the store. But I learned to operate the cash registers long before I could reach them. They would hold me up so I could ring things up. And I remember one instance where I had a person who wanted a spool of thread, and I remember it was a nickel. And she said what she wanted, and I took her nickel, and I rang it up, and I put it in the cash register. And then I went to get her thread, and we went over, and we didn't have the color that she wanted. And so then I had to give her back her nickel, and I didn't know how to get the cash register open. So my grandfather had to come help me get the cash register open. All I knew, I had to put it in, but I didn't know how to get it out. And I would run, like I said, a kind of free run of the place for the most part. But on Saturdays, we were very busy. And so I wasn't allowed in the store on Saturdays. And I usually had a babysitter. Usually that was the night I could have a hot dog and get to watch television. And I watched, I can remember watched Jimmy Durante and Jackie Gleason. Those were the big shows on Saturday night. But around 9 o'clock, they would close. And when I had to watch, when they turned out the big floodlights that were on the parking lot out front, then that was my clue that the store was closed and I could go in. But in the meantime, during the day, waiting and watching, I would watch out the window, and I could see all the people. It was just a continuous stream of people on the sidewalks in town. I mean, it was always, just a stream of people going in the different stores I could see, and the restaurants and the filling stations. I mean, everything was just bustling in Taylorsville, and it was so different than what you think of, and so it was a very big difference at that time. In the mid-50s, my grandparents built a drive-in restaurant on the east side of the building, and it was called the High Boy. And that was because there was a big sign out on the corner that had over 200 lights in it, and it said, "Hi neighbor, have a high boy." And so that was why they called it the High Boy. There was it served soft serve ice cream. That was the big deal. And they had a great big ice cream cone up on the corner of the building. They served sundaes and shakes and banana splits and that sort of thing. They also did short order things like a hamburger and fish sandwich and that, but most of what everybody wanted was the soft serve ice cream. Yeah, it was, within the last 10 years, that had been the big thing. Hadn't had that before. Yeah, just frozen ice cream like you'd buy, in the stores, but not soft serve. Grandparents closed the grocery store, and they remodeled again and moved the clothing store downstairs. And it had more of a self-service atmosphere, and the name of it was Fashion Fair. And they had a big sign up on the front. It was all remodeled and repainted and fixed. And they served clothes. They had clothing and purses and shoes and hats and that sort of thing. And so it was a big difference, but like I said, it was more of a self-service atmosphere, but my grandmother was always there to help somebody if they wanted help. So that wasn't much of a change from that perspective. In the mid-60s, the dam and the lake were beginning to be discussed, and it was kind of all the talk of the town. And we had stores that would open because they thought that was going to be the next thing. And I can remember we had a store that sold boats, and there was talk about building motels for the fishermen and that sort of thing. So it was beginning to come to a difference of our town was changing from that perspective. But of course, a lot of those businesses did not exist later when the dam and the water actually arrived. My grandparents decided around that time to close the clothing store, and they remodeled again, and they opened a sit-in restaurant. They still had the drive-in on the side, but they decided to have a sit-in restaurant. It was called Miller's Restaurant, and they served, had a dining room, and they had booths and a counter space, and they served not only sandwiches, but they also served dinners. So they had fried chicken or cod fillets or steaks, vegetables, mashed potatoes, green beans, slaw, salads, rolls, that sort of thing. And the restaurant was open until about the mid-70s. I guess we felt informed. What he had to say, we felt like we knew what was going on because we weren't going out any more than we had to. And so that was our lifeline of information about what was going on. He was telling us that, they had these cases, or we had a rise of cases, how many deaths there'd been and what kinds of response that we were having with how was the healthcare industry doing and handling it and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was our information. I've heard my grandparents talk about in 1918 in the Spanish flu, and that my grandmother was in a rural area, and she just said they just stayed home. But my grandfather was out more in the city, and he talked about that. People really got sick quickly. I don't remember him ever talking about whether he had it or not. I don't know that. And as far as polio is concerned, I was small, and I remember that around 1960, when the Sabin vaccine came out, that they were giving on a sugar cube. They would. My grandmother said, "We're going down to the health department." And Miss Johnson was the health nurse at the time, and she said, "We're going down here this evening and get your polio vaccine." And I didn't want to go, but she said, "Oh yeah, we're going." And so when we got there, the health department at that time was located between the courthouse and what's now the judge's office. They were two separate buildings. And there you went to the back of the building, and there was between them, and there was a stairwell that went up to the second floor. And when we got there, we were standing in line on the far side of the courthouse, and we had to wait, and the line went all the way around and across the front of the courthouse and down the side of the courthouse back to the stairwell, and then all the way up the stairwell to the second floor before you got to the health department. And so we stood in line for a couple of hours waiting to get there. When we got up there, Dr. Martin Heskes Gags and Ms. Johnson were there, and they would laid a little cup, a little piece of paper. They laid out a sugar cube, and they took a dropper and dropped the polio vaccine on the sugar cube and then pushed it over. You took the paper and put the sugar cube under your tongue and sat there until it dissolved. That was your vaccine. So it took a few seconds for them to give them to everybody, but it's, that's what we stood in line for 2 hours for. I don't think they use it in that way anymore. I think they have a different method. Well, you ask about history, Spencer County history, and I feel like that they contributed to Spencer County, to Taylorsville's history, and I wanted it to be there for everyone to remember. I called her Mama because she was the only mother I ever knew, and he was my granddaddy because my daddy was still alive, so he was granddaddy. Mama was one of the most kind people, I think, that she had such a kind manner and about her. When we went to buy clothing for the store, I can remember she would look at things and she'd say, "Oh, Mrs. So-and-so would like this, and I'll get it in her size," or, this would look good on someone else, and she would buy things for such and such because she knew that would be what they like. So she kind of shopped personally for them, as well. But she was just a very kind person, but hardworking. She did the majority of the work to run the business. Granddaddy worked hard at traveling and driving and getting things and delivering things. He helped deliver the groceries and that sort of thing. And he was kind of the mind behind the business, and he'd decide, I think we need to get rid of this business and try something else, or remodel this or change that. And he was that business end of the process. He was just all about how to make things better for the business and the community. And they both just worked hard together to make a living. I think to be understanding and open to other people's ideas and opinions makes the whole world a whole lot calmer for everybody.